Timothee Chalamet is an interesting person in terms of SMV according to me. Before starting, I want to make sure that this video is meant for entertainment and informational purposes and that I am not trying to insult anyone. Timothee Chalamet is attractive but not on the higher end like the people we analyzed previously. His appeal reminds me of Chico. Both have a good mixture of masculine and feminine features, but Chico is more masculine because of his more dimorphic features. That's why we talk a lot about sexual dimorphism on this channel and why it's so important in both males and females. While browsing about him on Google, I immediately noticed four main highly visible features: his temporal region, his skull and bone density, his short facial height, and his pretty boy appeal. Let's talk about his temporal region. Ideally, this region should be parallel to the bizygomatic width, but in his case it doesn't match, along with his slightly small skull does explain why he looks more appealing when his hairstyle has volume and covering the temples. In pictures when his hair is short and not covering the forehead and temples, it doesn't hide his slightly round forehead, skull, and temples and thus making him appear less harmonious. He is a good example of why changing hairstyles can be beneficial to some people. His overall pretty boy appeal comes from his feminine features, a low dimorphic frame, his low bone density, skull, and not so strong bone structure that we see in other more conventionally attractive men. He has a compact face, and the length of his face is 1.26 times longer than his width, which is not terrible but it's certainly not ideal. This is the reason why his face shape is slightly feminine and compact. Ideally, it should be 1.33 to 1.38 in men. Another thing that I noticed is his less dominant bone structure and density, further making him more feminine and less dimorphic, aka soft boy look. Part of it is due to his frame size. Moving on to his facial measurements, his facial thirds and fifths are almost near ideal. His lower third is smaller than the rest, which is a minor deviation and I won't consider it as a flaw. His mid-face is compact, which is around 0.96 and is ideal. His facial width to height ratio is highly masculine, making his face short and wide. However, due to his other features he still looks less dimorphic. The ratio of his mid-face is around 1.98, which can be found by dividing his facial width and mid-face height, which is ideal. His cheekbones are the high set, which is a common feature in the modeling industry, which can be found by looking at the widest part of the cheek, where the point of intersection is very far from his eyes. This is why his cheekbones protrude outwards, rather than projecting forwards in most faces. Moving on to his lower third, his bizygomatic to bigonial width is around 85%, which is slightly outside the ideal range but not necessarily a big flaw. His overall jaw width is high, in which the jaw inclines outwards, and is highly masculine. However, his chin isn't wide enough for his jaw, which gives him an interesting jaw shape. Part of it is due to jaw inclination. One thing that I noticed is that his mandible has some asymmetry, that is, it's not perfectly straight. I can also see some visible asymmetry in the nasal and eye area, which I think will not be visible to the average person. Apart from that, his facial symmetry falls in the near ideal range. His chin to philtrum ratio is ideal, which is around 2.12. His mouth and nose area is feminizing. If we look at his mouth width to nose width, it's 1.59 times his nose, which does not fall in the ideal range. However, his nose does harmonize with his eyes. His mouth width to his eyes and nose width to his eyes is ideal, which means that his nose and mouth are proportionate to each other, and it is due to his close-set eyes, which is pretty interesting how some of his features and not in the ideal range to harmonize with the others. His interpupillary distance is 43% of his facial, which is not ideal. His eyes are 0.7 eyes apart, which is not ideal. Ideally, they should be one eye apart. His eye area isn't great like models, but I think it's what makes his face unique and polarizing. For example, his dark low-set positively inclined eyebrows with his pale skin. One thing that people may confuse about in his eyes is his canthal tilt. It looks negative, but it's positive if you measure it correctly. the reason his tilt looks negative is due to his scleral show and eye shape, which is also the reason his eyes look tired. His eye shape is slightly more rounded than ideal, giving him less dimorphic appeal, which is around 2.17 times wider than it is tall. Overall his eyes are not ideal, but it's not bad either. His eye color, slight upper eyelid exposure, and his positive orbital shape are some of his positive features. Moving on to his side profile, we can see his largest flaw is his ramus. His ramus length is shorter and deviated from the ideal range. Ideally, it should be 0.7, but in his case, it's around 0.4. This is a flaw, but he still looks good because of the forward growth of his maxilla and mandible, combined with his lower third gives him a low lower third volume from certain angles. He also has a slightly negative orbital vector. Ideally, it should be perpendicular to this plane. His brow region is ideally slipped back, which is around 21 degrees. His nasofrontal angle is 146 degrees, which is extremely feminizing, and it's highly deviated from the ideal range. His nasolabial angle is around 128 degrees, which is also not ideal. Ideally, it should be around 94 to 117 degrees. His facial convexity is also slightly low, which is around 166 degrees, indicating his face is slightly more rounded than ideal. It is an indicator of dental occlusion. In his case it's slightly deviated, which means it probably doesn't have any overbite or underbite. His nasal tip and nasal facial angle are pretty ideal, however, his nose projection slightly deviates from the ideal range, but it isn't a big flaw, which is around 0.5. Timothee Chalamet lacks some ideal measurements, but that doesn't mean he is unattractive. You do not need to have a model-tier bone structure to be attractive. Of course having that helps, but in real life, most attractive people have a lot of flaws. His SMV can be confusing due to his low dimorphic appeal. I think he is more appealing to younger females. We will cover sexual dimorphism in the future. Overall his facial harmony with his masculine features combined with his on-screen persona makes him appear attractive to the audience. I thought he is around 5 feet 7 inches because of how skinny he is. It does prove that your face is more important than your body, especially on social media. We explained that in our previous video. If you want to get your face analyzed like we did here, but in a more detailed way, because a face has lots of measurements and it is not possible to outline every measurement in a single video, or if you are looking for advice on how to improve your looks, head over to our website and our team will be happy to help you. If you have any questions regarding any topic, you can contact us on Instagram, Telegram, or email. All the necessary links will be in the description box.